At 1 a.m. on a November night in 2016, a quiet family home in Loxahatchee, Florida, turned into the scene of a nightmare that no one could ever forget. In the darkness of that early morning, panicked screams filled the air. Inside the house, a young man lay dying in his bedroom, the victim of a brutal and senseless attack. From the house came 3 survivors: a distraught mother, her longtime boyfriend, and the victim's best friend. But they insisted there had been a 4th presence inside those walls, someone who had slipped in unnoticed, carried out the murder, and disappeared into the night without leaving a trace. This case would become one of betrayal, disputed evidence, shocking claims, and an eventual confession that left many questions about what truly happened that night. And as the truth emerged, it proved to be not only heartbreaking, but deeply unsettling. Let's take a closer look. Just before 1 a.m. on November 16, 2016, Palm Beach County emergency dispatchers received a frantic call. On the other end of the line was 56-year-old Nicola Barry, a mother who had just stumbled into her son's room to find him gravely injured. Her 21-year-old son, James Barry, was clinging to life, his body covered in stab wounds. When deputies and paramedics arrived, they entered a chaotic and blood-stained scene. 3 adults were present in the home: Nicola herself, her boyfriend, Guy Hand, and James's best friend, Jeff Jaspakowski, who had been staying the night. James was discovered on his bed, gasping for breath. Guy, his mother's boyfriend, was frantically attempting CPR. Paramedics quickly transferred James to the floor, but their desperate efforts could not save him. James Barry was pronounced dead inside his own bedroom, the victim of multiple stab wounds to his chest. The surviving occupants were escorted outside. A neighbor came over to comfort them, but even in those first moments, theories were already taking shape. Bloodstains were visible on both Guy and Jeff, signs of their frantic attempts to save James's life. And yet, as investigators looked deeper, questions began to mount. Inside the home, officers found a bloody carving knife resting on the kitchen counter. It had a curved 10-inch blade and a white handle. The trail of blood throughout the house told a chilling story. The attack had begun in the kitchen before moving into the hallway and finally ending in James's bedroom. The knife itself had come from inside the home. It was part of Guy's own collection. A butcher by trade, Guy had used that very knife earlier that evening while carving a roast for dinner. But how had the attacker gotten in? The house was supposed to be locked. There were no signs of forced entry on the front or side doors, but a back door had been left ajar. Outside, near that doorway, investigators discovered something critical: a pink-cased cell phone lying on the patio table, stained with what appeared to be blood. That phone belonged to Melanie E., James's 19-year-old girlfriend. That pink phone was more than just a misplaced item. To investigators, it was the first real clue pointing toward who may have slipped into the house and carried out the killing. Melanie E. was just 19 at the time, a bright young woman with her whole future ahead of her. She had been dating James for more than a year, and their relationship, according to friends, was filled with the same ups and downs most young couples experience. But what no one realized in those early morning hours was just how deeply connected she might be to the bloodshed inside that house. Detectives began piecing together the timeline of that night. Guy, the boyfriend of James's mother, said he was awakened by screams. He rushed into the kitchen to see James stumbling down the hallway covered in blood. Behind him stood Jeff, James's best friend, in shock at the sight. Nicola, James's mother, followed seconds later, screaming for help. According to them, James collapsed in his bedroom. Guy grabbed the carving knife from the floor, set it on the kitchen counter, and began performing CPR while Jeff dialed 911. But when deputies began questioning each of them separately, the details didn't perfectly align. Jeff swore he never touched the phone. Nicola claimed she didn't see who was holding the knife. Guy insisted he only moved it after the stabbing had already taken place. If none of them had been the attacker, then who was? Forensic teams got to work. They swabbed the knife for fingerprints and DNA. They collected blood samples from the walls, the floor, and the door frames. They bagged the pink phone for analysis. And as the evidence trickled into the crime lab, the story began shifting. On that pink phone were fingerprints. One of them matched Melanie, and the blood smeared across the case matched James Barry. That discovery flipped the investigation on its head. When deputies tracked Melanie down, she denied everything. She claimed she had left the phone at James's house earlier in the evening and had no idea how it ended up outside, covered in blood. But investigators weren't convinced. Witnesses told detectives about the rocky relationship between James and Melanie. They often argued, sometimes loudly, and there were even reports of heated breakups followed by reconciliations. Friends described Melanie as controlling and jealous. Some even believed she was capable of lashing out in anger. When deputies asked Melanie where she had been that night, her story shifted. At first, she said she was home with her parents. Later, she admitted she had driven past James's house. Eventually, she confessed that she had, in fact, been inside the home during the murder, but claimed she hadn't been the one holding the knife. Instead, she said someone else was responsible. Melanie pointed the finger back at James's own family. She suggested Guy, the mother's boyfriend, had lashed out in a drunken rage. She accused Nicola of lying to protect him, and she insisted she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there was a problem with her story. The DNA evidence told a different tale. Melanie's fingerprints were not only on the phone, but also on the handle of the carving knife. When confronted with this, her explanations unraveled. Detectives pressed harder, asking why she had lied repeatedly, why she had changed her stories so many times, and why her fingerprints were in places they should never have been if she was just an innocent bystander. Eventually, Melanie broke down. She admitted she had been in the house. She admitted she had picked up the knife. And finally, she admitted she had stabbed James. But even in her confession, she twisted the narrative. According to Melanie, it wasn't premeditated. She claimed James had been verbally abusive and that she snapped in the heat of the moment. She painted herself as the victim, insisting she had no intention of killing him. Investigators didn't buy it. The stab wounds told a far different story. James had been stabbed multiple times in the chest with deliberate, targeted strikes. This was not a single blow of self-defense. It was a sustained and violent attack. By the time the interrogation was over, Melanie was in handcuffs, charged with the second-degree murder of James Barry. But even with her confession, the case wasn't as clear-cut as it seemed. Her defense team began laying out a strategy that would drag James's family into the spotlight and raise unsettling questions about what had really happened inside that house. As the case against 19-year-old Melanie moved forward, prosecutors prepared for a courtroom battle that would grip the local community. The evidence appeared damning: her fingerprints on the murder weapon, her DNA on the phone, and her own recorded confession. But her defense team was determined to cast doubt on nearly every piece of that puzzle. They argued that the investigation had been sloppy from the beginning. They pointed to inconsistencies in the statements given by Guy, Nicola, and Jeff on the night of the murder. Why had Guy moved the knife? Why did Nicola claim not to see who was holding it? And why was Jeff's version of events so different from theirs? The defense wanted the jury to believe that Melanie had been framed, or at least that she had not acted alone. They painted her as a troubled teenager, manipulated by older adults who wanted to shift the blame onto her shoulders. But the prosecution pushed back hard. They reminded the jury that the most important evidence, the fingerprints and DNA, could not be explained away. Melanie's prints were on the handle of the knife. Her phone, stained with James's blood, had been discarded just steps from the back door. And her confession, despite her attempts to soften it, was clear. She admitted stabbing James multiple times. The trial stretched on for weeks. Witnesses testified about the rocky relationship between James and Melanie. Friends recalled explosive arguments and text messages filled with jealousy and threats. A neighbor even told the court that they had seen Melanie's car parked near James's house the night of the murder. When Melanie took the stand in her own defense, she tried once more to rewrite the story. She claimed she never meant to kill James, that she only wanted to scare him. She cried as she told the jury she loved him and couldn't believe what had happened. But the tears didn't erase the brutal facts. The jury deliberated for hours, weighing her testimony against the mountain of forensic evidence. And when they returned, their verdict was firm. Melanie was found guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the judge handed down the sentence, 40 years in prison. Melanie, just 19 years old, was led away in handcuffs to begin serving a punishment that would span nearly half her life. For James's family, the verdict was both a relief and a heartbreak. They had lost a son in a violent and senseless act, and now another young life was essentially over, locked away in a cell for decades. Yet despite the conviction, not everyone was satisfied. Some questioned whether justice had truly been served. Why had the stories from that night been so inconsistent? Could there have been more to the crime than what was revealed in court? And why, after all these years, do lingering doubts still hang over the case? Even today, some wonder if the full truth about what happened in that house on November 16, 2016, ever truly came out. Was it simply a crime of passion? A jealous girlfriend who lost control? Or was there more to the story, something hidden behind the walls of that family home, locked away with secrets that will never be told? One thing is certain, a young man's life was stolen in the prime of his youth, and the explanation remains as unsettling as the crime itself. And that's the chilling story of James Barry's murder. If you enjoy real, true crime stories that dive deep into the mysteries, the evidence and the lingering questions, don't forget to subscribe to Mystery Note, because in the world of crime, the answers are never as simple as they seem.